Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our virtual town hall meeting today. My name is Cindy Dodds, and I am the Director of Professional Development at ACSI. In this town hall, Christian school leaders and ACSI staff will discuss why standardized testing is absolutely imperative this year, how schools can still implement and schedule testing, and ways to analyze the data to identify summer loss, the COVID slide, and important baseline achievement. We will also focus on ways, based on this data, to plan instruction that effectively addresses students' learning needs. These town hall meetings provide a venue for you to hear what others are doing as they confront the current challenges, and they provide you the opportunity to get your questions answered among colleagues and friends. Our speakers today are David Smitherman, Carrie Edwards, and Lisa Chubbuck from our ACSI Purposeful Design Department. Our panelists are school leaders, Renita Hall, Lisa Gerdes, Melissa King, and Michael DeSaro. After our panelists provide their insights, we will open the floor for your questions. If you've not already submitted questions via email, please begin submitting your questions now and throughout the meeting. You can use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. These questions are being monitored and we will present them to our panel. As we begin, we would love to know more about who's on our call today. Please take a moment to share your school information with us through the questions popping up on your screen at this time. Before we move on to the introduction of our speaker, I would like to introduce you to my co-host and ACSI Vice President of USA, Dr. David Balick.
Thank you so much, Cindy. As always, appreciate you so much. Learning and Development Manager Sarah Longcar, Kate Berman, the entire PD team does such a great job getting us ready for these town halls, and we've had a number of them. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. By now, many of you know I like to collect quotes, and I know, I've been told it's a little bit of an unusual hobby, a little bit odd, but something I enjoy doing. So speaking of quotes, Samuel Johnson, an 18th century writer, said people need to be reminded more often than they need to be instructed. Think about that for a moment. Samuel Johnson, 18th century writer, said people need to be reminded more often than they need to be instructed. Learning new things keeps us sharp, helps us improve ourselves, but there's so much that we've already learned, but just don't apply, right? Or remember. One of those things we need to remember, especially at such a time as this, is just how near God is to us. Here's some hope-filled truth to remember. There's never a place we can go where his presence won't be there first. Think about that. He's in our yesterday, he's in our today, and he's in our tomorrow all at the same time. He rejoices over us, rewards us, blesses us, smothers us with his forgiveness and grace every day throughout the day. In addition to the good, there's no tragedy we'll face, no hardship we'll endure, no adversity we'll encounter where God is not with us, steadily holding us up with his mighty, righteous, and perfect right hand. So when you feel lonely and wonder where God is, know that he is about you, above you, after you, amidst you, around you, among you, before you, behind you, by you, for you, inside you, near you, over you, right? You get the idea. He's everywhere. He's everywhere all the time, always and forever. He is near us. When you experience fear and wonder why God won't remove it from you, know that he hasn't given you a spirit of fear. His word tells us but of love, power, and a sound mind, that nothing can separate us from his love and presence, always and forever. He is near us. When you're sick and you don't understand why God won't heal you, know that he's still the great physician and Jehovah Rapha, the God who heals. The time frame you have in mind may not match his, but rest assured he is doing a work in you and through you, always and forever. He's near us. There's nothing nothing will encounter that God has not already defeated. And not just defeated, but totally annihilated on our behalf. As Jesus hung on the cross, he covered our past, present, and future sins. Always and forever, he's near us. When you go through devastating situations, he's with you. When your life seems to be spinning out of control, he is with you. And when you can't see the path or even the next step, he is with you. You know, there are options everywhere that beg us to place our hope, our trust, our joy in them. Those temporary joys and pleasures hold no comparison. We know this. They hold no comparison to the eternal, never-ending presence of our Almighty God who calls us his children. His presence is the prize. Amen. It's what we can look forward to for all eternity. Let's pray. God, thank you that your word reminds us, commands us, in fact, in the book of Joshua, to be strong and courageous, to not be afraid, to not be discouraged, for you are with us wherever we go. And in Isaiah, you remind us that when we pass through the waters, you will be with us. And when we pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over us. And when we walk through the fire, we will not be burned. The flames will not set us ablaze. Father, thank you. You promised to never leave us nor forsake us, that always and forever you are with us. So as our schools and school leaders are doing all they can to finish their school years well, to finish strong, and while parts of our world are starting to reopen, we ask that you would guard our hearts and minds, continue to heal those who are sick, protect those who are not, protect and strengthen the brave people serving others on the front lines of this pandemic. Give our leaders wisdom as they navigate this season. Unite your global church. Restore communities for the glory of your name and rescue people from depression, addiction, and loneliness. Continue to transform us, Lord. Calm our fears as we trust in you and help us to always, always remember your goodness, your faithfulness, your provision for our every need, always and forever. And we pray all these things in the matchless name of Jesus. Amen. Well, today we're going to hear first from our Purposeful Design Publications Department. David Smitherman is ACSI Student Assessment Program and Training Manager. David is going to start us off, then he's going to introduce a couple of his colleagues. Carrie Edwards and Lisa Chubbuck are also going to share in these next few minutes. David, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us, brother.
Thank you, David. This spring's instructional shift includes a high reliance on technology to accommodate remote learning, a refocus on content, adjustments to instructional time, how concepts are introduced, and how mastery is determined, just to name a few. How will this instructional shift affect the academic achievement of our students? According to the April NWEA white paper entitled "The COVID-19 Slide," projections suggest major academic impacts for students. The paper predicts that students could return in fall 2020 with roughly 70% of the learning gains in reading relative to a typical school year. In mathematics, students are likely to return with less than 50% of the learning gains, and in some grades, nearly a full year behind what we would observe in normal conditions. These alarming statements remind us of the importance of making the effort to develop and maintain supportive relationships with students now and throughout the summer, and understand what students know, establishing a baseline, especially after the events of this spring. At the very least, we can expect that learning gains will vary considerably from student to student. The purpose of educational assessment is to correctly determine student understanding and then to use those assessments results to inform, modify, adjust, enrich, and differentiate instruction to meet the learning needs of the students. Standardized summative and benchmark tests, in combination with other kinds of formative information, can help educators more accurately determine what students have learned. Standardized tests are designed to reflect a consensus curriculum and broadly accepted standards in all content areas. They provide valid, objective, and diagnostic mastery data in a very short amount of time. The bottom line is that these types of tests do not take away from teaching time. Rather, they are important teaching tools. Additionally, for Christian schools that participate in state school choice programs, this type of testing can be mandatory, and these schools need to determine this year's requirements. This year, ACSI and our partner testing companies are providing additional flexibility for summative, periodic, and adaptive benchmark testing, allowing schools to consider options that best fit their schedules this spring, summer, and next fall. As well, schools can choose from a variety of formats, including paper pencil, online, and now remote online testing. I have prepared a handout with links to helpful resources for planning and implementing meaningful assessment administrations. Next, Carrie Edwards, ACSI's textbook trainer coordinator, will introduce practical assessment to instructions connections.
Thank you, David. So as teachers, what do we do? What does this mean for classroom instruction moving forward? The good news is that we do have tools that can help us address these impacts. With little available data entering into the new school year, the most practical and quickest way to jumpstart instruction would be to use a standardized summative and benchmark assessment to determine individual students' skill levels, mastery, and learning gaps. Using these assessments will save teachers time and eliminate the daunting challenge of trying to create a comprehensive summative assessment on their own. Instructionally, teachers will need to effectively differentiate learning more than they ever have before. The answer here is not slowing the instruction down, but using the data from standardized testing along with common formative assessments normally given at the end of the school year to help identify gaps and formulate personalized strategic learning plans for each student. Strategizing as a staff or grade level teams, think about what's been covered this school year to identify where there will be anticipated gaps based on the students in each class pre-COVID-19 and through the weeks of remote learning. It's also vital to decide on or identify the most important standards or learning targets for each grade level moving into the new school year. It's likely teachers will need even more tools and strategies to differentiate learning and accelerate growth because their students' needs will be greater. Pacing in the new school year will be so important. Perhaps the new sense of normalcy will mean classes will need to be regrouped to work on skill mastery rather than grade level mastery items where teachers will work across grade levels. This alone will mean a major mind shift is needed for both teachers and parents. As teachers, we often plan, implement, gather, and make changes as we go. This process will be imperative to meeting students' needs moving forward. Since the social emotional aspect of the classroom is such a large part of establishing a group at the beginning of a school year, depending on the government restrictions still in place in the fall, teachers and administrators may need to consider starting off the school year with the disrupted classroom reassembled as students are assessed and the school works to reestablish their learning culture. Given the disruption of COVID-19, it's likely certain that blended learning will become the new norm. Moving forward, teachers will need to provide online options that include best practices while providing support for students and addressing the needs of the students that will have stayed on course during the disruption as well. Here, in addition to regular textbook use, teachers may need to look at adding instructional technology to their curriculums. With its ability to adapt instruction to the individual, this technology can provide crucial support for both teachers and students. Well-designed and researched adaptive programs, particularly for reading and math, may be part of the solution to address learning gaps and accelerate all students toward grade level proficiency. To assist you with your thinking and planning, I have provided a handout that mentions several things to consider as teachers and administrators move forward with planning instruction to address these important issues. No matter the instructional approach from here on, it seems that traditional education as we knew it will forever be fundamentally changed. But what remains the same is the need for data-driven instruction. Now more than ever, the need for standardized testing is imperative to addressing the needs of each student in our schools. To help us understand how to specifically use summative testing data, it's my privilege to introduce my colleague, Lisa Chubbuck, ACSI Assessment Program Coordinator.
Thank you, Carrie. My name is Lisa Chubbuck, and I am the Assessment Program Coordinator at ACSI. To gather necessary data from a standardized assessment to make the instructional changes mentioned by Carrie, we will analyze the criterion reference scores, which are standards-based scores that are very diagnostic and provide baseline data. These scores are easily analyzed because there is a national cut score that indicates proficiency based on specific criteria for each standard. As we begin this process, we need to be strategic in using the data to first identify strengths to determine where students have achieved mastery and celebrate those successes. Then address areas of critical needs so we can focus more on the areas where students need to improve. Standards-based data analysis is as simple as looking at the objective scores for the Terranova 3 or the domains for the Iowa assessments. All test publishers have similar reports with criterion reference scores that can be used to evaluate grade level proficiency. An administrator or teacher will compare the group or class data to cut scores to quickly identify where students are or are not proficient. This process will help reduce the instructional time for mastered content that can be easily spiraled into a modified instructional plan and allow time for teachers to address content that is crucial to closing the gap and improving student proficiency. Teachers can strategically dig into the curriculum to find the identified standards that need to be addressed and adjust their pacing guide to build time into the teaching schedule to intentionally address gaps. Here's an example of what your teachers might do. Just stay with me for a minute while we get a little technical. First, I compare class scores to the national cut score for each content, objective, domain, or standard. To identify strengths, I simply put a check mark next to any score that is above the national cut score. After strengths have been identified, I circle any score that is at or below the national cut score. Next, I count each circled score for a content standard to determine how many students need intervention. The number of students affected will determine if I should plan for individual, small group, or whole group instruction in this area. The further I get into my analysis, I will have a clear picture of how to provide additional intervention to close identified gaps. Second, I compare my individual student scores to the national cut scores for each content, objective, domain, or standard. For consistency's sake and to identify strengths, I put a check mark next to an individual student score that is above the national cut score. Then, to identify areas to improve, I circle any individual student score that is at or below the national cut score. After I complete marking the individual student scores that are below the national cut score, I will count the number of students who have a circled score for any content standard. Again, the number of students affected will determine if I should plan for individual, small group, or whole group instruction in this area. Next, I will review the student count to see where I have 25% or fewer students at or below the national cut score for a content standard and plan for individualized student instruction. A student count between 25 and 50% of students at or below the national cut score will indicate small group instruction. Lastly, in areas where there are greater than 50% of students at or below the national cut score, I will plan for whole group instruction. By classifying students into these three categories, I can plan my instructional time wisely for each content standard that needs to be reviewed. These simple steps allow me to analyze and act on the criterion reference scores to set goals and track improvement. While I realize this is a lot of information to absorb, please know that ACSI stands ready to support you with training to help you connect data to instruction. There are handouts available after the town hall to help walk schools through content standards data analysis, along with additional training information as well.
Thank you, team, for sharing your expertise in this area and providing the important data on the expected student academic slide, the challenge of differentiating learning and pacing, as well as helping us to discern how to analyze and act on the testing data. David, I'm going to pass it back to you to introduce our panelists.
Thanks, Cindy. We've got some really good questions coming in and we're anxious to get to them. But before we do, our panelists are going to introduce themselves and share their unique insights in light of the topic today. Let's begin with Renita Hall. Renita serves as Dean of Academics at Pacific Christian Academy in Federal Way, Washington. Great to have you with us today, Renita.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And what a great presentation already done by David, Carrie, and Lisa. Thank you. That was a lot of great information that I was sitting there trying to take in as you guys were sharing, and glad that you're going to have some handouts there. As the Dean of Academics, I know that it's so important for us to be doing standardized testing. We use that information every year to be able to look at our students to see who's struggling, who's doing well, how do we need to adjust things in the classroom, how do we need to adjust for our teachers, our curriculum. And so I feel like even more than ever this year, we need to make sure we're doing that. We know that our students are going to have gaps, whether it's our students that we're continually working with as we finish up this school year, or the students that are going to come in next year. We know that there's going to be a lot of gaps. And so because of that, we need that standardized information to be able to look at what are the best practices that we're going to use in our classrooms as we start the next school year. Here in Washington, our governor has placed a 4-phase plan in front of us. We are currently in phase 1, which means that we are definitely in 100% online schooling, and that's how we'll finish up our school year. Our original plan was to be able to come back to school in early June and do our spring assessments during that time, which we normally do in April. And now we're finding that's not going to happen. And so we've looked at a new plan, and our new plan is going to be in August. After we sat and started thinking about, is August a good time? We decided that's really a great time for us, because now we're going to be working with the data that's coming from our students that we're actually going to be working with next year. So our students who are returning, new students coming in, we'll test each of those, and we'll have that data to be working with and to be giving to our teachers to help see what things we need to adjust inside of the classroom and apply all of those things that Carrie and Lisa and David just shared with us. Like I said, we know that there's going to be a lot of gaps. So we need to figure out, well, what are those gaps? What are those areas that we need to focus in on? And how are we going to meet those needs? How are we going to implement things in the classrooms? How are we going to adjust curriculum? How are we going to adjust timing? With all of these things, for us, it started bringing up a lot of questions. Like, how do we support the parents? Those of you who are in education, you know that when test scores come and they are maybe low, when we have to bring those and talk to a parent about that, those are hard conversations to have with parents. And even more so this next year, I think we're going to have some of those difficult conversations about the gaps that are in our students' learning. And so we need to be able to talk about that with parents. We need to help them to understand that it's going to require everyone working together and all of the support of this whole team in order for us to see that gap fixed within our students. Another thing that we have been talking through is how do we come together next year and put together a good plan to see progress next year and yet now not be completely overwhelmed. We don't want to overwhelm parents, we don't want to overwhelm students, we don't want to overwhelm teachers, but yet we want to see some good progress. So we need to fill in the gap that happened from the slide of students not being in school, as well as continue and see the progress. We don't want to have the next year, a 5th grader still not be ready for 6th grade. So we've got to figure out how do we fill that gap. And so there's been lots of questions that we've been posing as a team, as an admin team, trying to come up with what do we need to do, and thankful to ACSI for all of the Zoom calls and webinars that they've been posting. It's been super helpful, and lots of small groups and times for us to be able to think and come together and come up with plans for our schools everywhere that we are. So another obvious question, how do we come back to school? How do we come back into classrooms? How do we handle the social emotional concerns of our students? Are some of the gaps that are there because of social emotional needs? And how do we fix those things as well? So all of this is put together in a handout, and lots of questions for you to be able to take back to your school as well, and hopefully help you in the things that you need to discuss in your schools. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Renita. We sure appreciate you participating in our town hall today. Great start. We're off to here. Now let's welcome Lisa Gerdes. Lisa is principal at Veritas Christian Academy in Wayland, Massachusetts. Welcome, Lisa.
Unmuted. Am I unmuted now? I thought I muted myself. Let me start again. Thank you so much for having me to this town hall. I have so much appreciated these meetings. They have been immensely helpful as we are planning and going through this crisis. We are from a small New England school, fairly academically rigorous area of the country. We are 140 students, K through 8. And it's been a challenge, especially evaluating where our littlest students are doing. And middle schoolers are a little easier to evaluate, but how do we know how our littlest are doing? So we started this process initially going online, actually not online, being asynchronous using Google Classroom, saying we'll be back in the classroom in 3 weeks. And so let's cancel standardized testing and give ourselves more time for curriculum. Obviously, I came full circle, and as a team, we talked through this quite a bit, thinking actually it is probably one of the best uses of our times to do standardized testing, and that is partly because of some data that we've gathered as we've been through this process. We've been doing a lot of surveys, faculty and family surveys, and some of that information is included in the handout that I've written. Our first few weeks were asynchronous. We were really just expecting to be back in the classroom, and our goal was get lessons out, get work back, and get technology to work. After that, we found out pretty quickly we needed to add our online classes, teach new material, and know that we had to figure out if the students were absorbing that material. And that became a pretty large focus. We continued to do assessments. I know some schools have dropped that, but not so much to keep the kids accountable as much as it was for us to get some feedback on how they were doing. We gave surveys to families on a weekly basis to tweak the system in real time and make sure that we were meeting needs and responding as quickly as possible. Faculty we were meeting with almost continuously, and the one survey that we gave received 100% response. So that the data we've gathered and all this was really useful and informed a lot of our decisions going forward. So biggest problem for us, and the best way for us to describe it, is our faculty is doing their work in a cloud, sending the work to a child who's receiving it in a cloud, and then the child does the work and it comes back through the cloud to the teacher, who's then looking at work and looking at an assessment and saying, I wonder how this child is doing. And that has been our struggle. So it has been much harder than we expected to get accurate information about our student performance. 8 to 10% of the students struggled to get work to us until we started getting them tutored. Several were basically cheating. They could answer questions in their work that they could not answer either online, in person in Zoom classes, or on assessments. Some received too much parent help. So we've had gorgeous 5th grade papers, quality of high school, which were clearly not student done. Not a whole lot of reasoning, and a lot of easy answers. And then some students who just used multiple choice tests and just rushed and gave us what we would call nonsense results. Our faculty also, through our surveys, told us that 40% felt that they could see the student progress was weaker, and 6% is much weaker. Before COVID, 10% of our students would require support because they're on IEPs. Post-COVID, we're seeing that's really more like 15% of the class. I have given some data of math test assessments pre-COVID and post-COVID, and you can see a mild decline, which was actually very encouraging. The part that was discouraging was that more students than expected saw that decline, and we would like to be able to measure that. So we've come full circle knowing that it's incredibly important for us to do the standardized testing because we need an independent assessment of data to see where students are in their learning. We want to know, are they where we would expect them to be? We're expecting some slide. If there's some slide, how far off? How many students have that slide? How deep was it? And everything that was just addressed by Lisa Chubbuck is exactly what we're looking at. So this summer, our plan is to do we always do some summer learning, and we're to intensify that, provide tutoring if needed, but we are starting first thing next fall with our standardized test, and we're going to use it to do small group, individual, and whole classroom learning plans. Thank you so much for having us and for hosting these.
Very much appreciated, Lisa. Thank you. Next, we have Melissa King, actually two leaders from Okeechobee Christian Academy. First up is going to be Melissa King, who is principal at OCA. Melissa, good to have you here. And we'll have Michael DeSaro up in just a little bit. Melissa, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Balick. I am very happy to be here. I'm like the rest of the panelists. I'm so excited that you guys have been offering these wonderful town hall meetings, but with it comes a lot of nerves, so bear with me. It's been quite an interesting experience since March. We found out on Friday afternoon when our students were leaving for spring break that our school would be closing for what we thought was a few weeks. So we thought for sure we'd be coming back to do spring assessments. And some things have since then changed, obviously, as I'm sure the rest of the panelists would agree. But Dr. Balick, I do have a quote for you here, and it comes from John Maxwell, and it says, "Growth stops when you lose the tension between where you are and where you could be." And so as a school, I've only been in administration for about the last 5 years. We had a lot of data that we had collected from summative assessments at the end of the year where we had checked that box that we had done it, but we hadn't really done anything with that data as a school. So that was one of my goals, was to help transition the thought processes behind those summative assessments for our staff and our students to be able to continue to grow and develop. And so that year we had ACSI come out and do some training with our staff. And that happened to be the year that DRC had some issues with their testing results, so we didn't get them in time. So that was a big obstacle for us. But since then, we've been able to get our teachers on board and doing assessments. One of the big aspects of it is staff buy-in. If you're admin on here, I'm sure when you talk to your staff about assessments, they might get a little panicked and nervous because they think automatically this is going to be connected to whether I have a job or not. And sometimes as admin, we need to do a better job communicating that the assessment data that we're going to be looking at is not necessarily to critique them so much as it is we're wanting to help strengthen the students that we have, whether it's improving on their weaknesses or continuing to grow on their strengths. And if you're in this town hall as a teacher, you should be looking at data too. And when we come to you talking to you about, let's look at your data, it's not necessarily a bad thing, as we're wanting you to continue to be able to grow and have your students be able to continue to grow as well. So we had done a lot with our teachers this year on getting them to look at the assessment data in their classrooms. Let's say, for example, a Chapter 5 math test. We had the teachers, they would give the assessment, and then we had them do some data analysis. How many students in your class missed number 1? How many students in your class missed number 2? And they would do this for each student throughout the whole assessment and be able to take a look at, is there some instruction that I need to go over again from Chapter 5? Maybe there's a few students, so that goes back to what Lisa spoke to as far as Is it individualized instruction? Is it small group? Is it whole group? And move from there. So we got some buy-in from the teachers in that respect. That trickled down to the students because the students realized, okay, I got these wrong, but my teacher really wants me to make a difference and help me perfect that skill. And the parents were appreciative too. And so that buy-in trickled down from the admin all the way to the teacher, to the parents, to the student. And so when we got to the end of this year, there was no way that I was going to let that momentum that had built up over these past couple of years die. And so we reached out through one of our publishing companies, and we decided to do the diagnostic test called Let's Go Learn. They offered us a free pilot program. So we successfully tested all of our students. We have about 200 students in our school, K through 12th grade, but we only tested our K4 through 12th grade students in both the math portion and the reading portion. And our students are actively working on the EDGE program, which offers individualized instruction for the skill areas where they were weak as we speak. So as we're winding down and phase 1 in Florida has happened, some of our parents are going back to work. So we wanted to lighten the load on them and give some more flexibility with what we were offering instruction wise. So our students, depending on what grade they are, might do anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes on either reading or math EDGE program each day. We've always done a summer program like Lisa spoke about. We want to keep that rigor high over the summer months, especially for those that are lower. So we have students, if they are just at the bare minimum of passing the grade requirement to move on to the next grade level, they are required to do some summer work. And so what we're doing is we're going to continue them on the summer EDGE program with 20 to 30 minutes a day for 4 times a week at least. And then if it's suggested that they do it based on their yearly average, they might have 20 to 30 minutes for 2 to 3 times a week. And then if our students ended with an A average, it's optional, but many of our parents take advantage of that to be able to continue moving their students along academically. So we don't have the summer slide. Now it'll be the COVID summer slide. But we felt it was very important to be able to get some kind of data on our students. So if you are a school that you're not going to be able to test before we reach the end of the year and you're starting to be concerned about that, don't panic. There's lots of different alternatives that you can do, such as looking at your curriculum and finding a summative test that might be included as part of that, or review, and offering that to the students to see how well they perform. And also, if that's not available, look at data from years past that you can start making some decisions on moving forward with how you're going to assess or plan instruction around. So that's all I have.
All right, Melissa, thank you so much. And great quote, by the way. I'm a John Maxwell fan, so thank you for that. Last but not least, we have Melissa's colleague at Okeechobee Christian Academy. Michael DeSaro is the data coach at OCA. Michael.
Thank you very much. I'd like to speak today kind of on a couple of different points as to why we do standardized assessments versus just typical curricular assessments. As a school, we've chosen to really hone in on our standardized assessment data and be able to use that to drive our instruction. It's important for us to look at standards-based assessments rather than just curricular assessments, because curricular assessments only test necessarily what's in the curriculum, and every curriculum is created differently. So when we look at a curriculum, it may introduce a particular concept in a particular grade that may be different from what another curriculum is using. And we find that that can be very difficult to understand for parents, students, teachers, and those of us that are really trying to desegregate this data. So if you look at a standardized assessment, those are based off of national standards that everybody's looking at. And it's important for us to do this so we can really recognize where our school is and where our students are, so that we can find those areas that are of need, and we can find those celebrations that we can do for the areas that they've done really well with, and really pinpoint an individualized instructional plan for that student to be able to succeed. It's also very important when you're looking at curriculums not to have a smorgasbord of curriculums throughout your school. The danger that you run into when you have this many different curriculum style is, again, like I was saying, sometimes a concept may be introduced at a different time in a different curriculum. There may be two curriculums that actually introduce the same concepts, but over different time periods. So if you're picking and choosing curriculums from one year to the next, there could be a whole concept that's just completely lost, and then you have a gap. And that's where we tend to find that some of those learning gaps can occur. So what do we do as a school? We typically try, as Melissa said, to do pre-assessments, and I think that's very important because when you do a pre-assessment for any kind of unit, your teachers are able to see where their students are, what they've already mastered, and how to utilize their instructional minutes to their fullest. It also provides a lot of really good ongoing data that a teacher can use so that they're using all of their instructional time wisely. In addition to pre-assessments, we try to do benchmark testing. We typically do this in the fall, we do it again in the winter, and then we have a summative assessment in the spring. This gives us a lot of tracking data that we can use to be able to see where students are, where they need to be, and how we can get them there. One thing that we've really found helpful is making sure that your benchmark assessments are aligned to your summative assessment. In years past, we've given some benchmark assessments that may not be completely aligned with the summative assessment that we gave. We found that that was, while good data, still very difficult to desegregate and make good decisions on because the data didn't necessarily align with what we were getting ready to find out from a summative assessment. So we've really put a big push on being able to do benchmark assessments that are aligned with our summative assessment. And ACSI offers a ton of information on how to get these benchmarking assessments up and going. Another very important factor that we looked at is longitudinal tracking. Longitudinal tracking is basically being able to look at student data over a long period of time. It's very important to do this so that we can track where a student has been as well as where a student is headed. It helps us to find learning gaps. It helps us to find gaps in instruction, and it helps our school as a whole to be able to move forward in our curriculums. Longitudinal tracking is very important in the fact that you must have the same kind of assessment from year to year. If you change assessments from year to year, it makes it very difficult to do this tracking because every assessment has their own style of scoring. While we do as much as we can with assessments, there's still many things that we are working on, and we want to do everything we can to provide our students and our parents with the best data that we can conduct. It's important this year, as Melissa said, that we are able to continue this traction that we've gained. And that's why we are doing as much assessment as possible right now and collecting as much data as possible to make sure that when our students do return in the fall, we have a plan of action that is going to be set in and moving forward with it. We kind of look at this as building a house on sand. It's very difficult if your foundation is sandy. And these concepts that we can find through data tracking and data-driven instruction is what helps us to make sure that we solidify that foundation so that by the time we build our entire house, when our children are getting up into their older years of education, they're able to continue to grow and they're able to continue to build off of the concepts and the basic foundations that we've been able to give them in the younger years.
Thank you all for sharing such wonderful insights. We want to invite all of our panel members back on the screen at this time so we can get to our questions. The first question is for Melissa, and it comes from Donna at Dayspring Christian, and she would like to know, Melissa, if you would be willing to share your Summer Edge program. What does that look like exactly?
So the EDGE program is from Let's Go Learn. They offer a diagnostic test, and there's several different ones that you can sign up for. I'm not too familiar with how it works normally because we became part of the pilot program where there was no charge for us until June 15th. But they offer a assessment for English and one for math, as well as pre-algebra and algebra 1. So we did that whole diagnostic test within 2 days of our students, which is about 150 of them. And based on that, the teachers are giving the students assignments to log into You can assign them the EDGE program based on their diagnostic scores, and they work on 20 to 30 minutes each day, depending on their grade level and which subject is being assigned. So we've made some adjustments. So for instance, 5th grade, they have what's called critical thinking 1 day a week. So that class, they're working on their English skills instead of her moving on with critical thinking instruction. And in regular math class for 5th grade, she's having them complete Math Edge program on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday instead of their regular curriculum. And so that will continue on through summer based on their year-end average grade from the 4 9 weeks combined.
Great. Sounds like a wonderful opportunity there with EDGE. The other question I had was a follow-up for Renita. And here Anna wants to know whether or not you'll be doing this testing prior to school beginning or once school begins.
We're hoping to do it before school begins. Kind of the concept behind it is for us to take a week, get all of our testing done, and then be able to go into our normal teacher development, getting things ready for the school year, then have the school year begin, receive our data analysis from the testing, and then be able to take a day to be able to go through that with our teachers and really start the year to get the momentum going with the correct data for our students that we have right now.
Great. Okay, David, to you for the next one.
Thank you, Cindy. Our next question, what is the turnaround time for the various test results? What is the turnaround time for the various test results? Anyone in particular want to field that question?
I'd be happy to, David. I can speak for the services that we provide. Terra Nova 3 is 15 business days from the time that the scoring center receives the materials. Iowa Assessments is 10 business days, and Iowa Online is 48 hours. ACT Aspire is opening summative testing early, September 1st this year, and they will have a quicker turnaround as well this year.
Very good. Thank you, David.
The next question, what is the best process for a school to use its standardized scores? Does an administrative team review those scores first and then make recommendations to teachers? Or do you start with teachers taking a look at them and then having administrative staff affirm the decisions that need to be made about a particular student's needs? How are your schools using these scores and processing those as a school? Yes, Michael.
So at our school, that's typically kind of what my job entails as a data coach, is I look at all of the scores that come in and kind of make my own assessments of where the needs are, as well as the teachers. And we work alongside each other to try and be able to desegregate that data. Sometimes, two heads is better than one. So if you can have other people really look into it, they may have a different perspective of being able to come up with ideas to help that particular student.
Melissa.
Before we had Mr. DeSaro in that position, what we did was we reached out to ACSI, and they actually came and did a workshop at our school, and we signed up for a regional one where other schools could come and participate with us. And so we had somebody from ACSI walk us through the data. I'm not sure if that's something that you still offer, but if it is, I would recommend for schools to take advantage of that, to do a regional one. It's very insightful. They give you lots of tips on looking at the data and how to use it, and you can have staff members there. And then from that, you can become more comfortable on your own working in admin or a data coach job, desegregating that to your teachers. But if you're new and it's scary to you, I would definitely say to reach out for somebody, to someone for help like ACSI with that program.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that? Lisa, do you still do that?
Yes, we do. So that is something that you can contact us about, and we would be able to set up a consultation and go over the needs of your school to get you set up with the training. And it's free for ACSI schools.
Lisa Gerdes, you looked like you wanted to say something.
Oh, just that I completely agree with involving staff as soon as possible and having them look at the data as a team to get buy-in. I think it was you, Melissa, who shared that. I think that's critical. I think that they need to see the data for their class and feel involved in the process, especially year to year. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Next question. How do we maintain deep assessing of understanding versus shallow? How do we maintain deep assessing of understanding versus shallow? Would anyone like to take that question? See, the wheels are turning. Melissa.
Initially, it's really easy right now to do a Google form where it's kind of getting graded for you and sent back to the teachers. But, with that, the kids are sneaky. And so many people that are of the homeschool mind are thinking that they're helping people, and they're posting information on, just out there on the website where the kids can literally type in the exact question that you're doing and the answer pops up, and it takes away that critical thinking. So what we've encouraged our teachers to do is to use the Google Forms still, because that's what's easiest for us, it's what works, but to have more short answer or extended response, and then do more with projects. For instance, my son, he's in 6th grade, and part of his history final is he was to let his teacher know which historical character, historical figure from chapters 1 through 16 he was going to dress up as on his Zoom presentation this coming Friday, and have 10 hints to give his class on who that person is. So when you're looking for deep assessment, you have to look beyond the A, B, C, D choices and go in.
Very good. Anyone else want to weigh in on that? Go ahead, Lisa.
I think in math in particular, you have to give as many different assessments as possible. You have to require them to show their work. That's where PDFs, printing them out at home and showing their work, you just don't, you don't want them to cheat on math. You'll never know how they're doing, and math is so critical. And, you need to get back the child's thinking on it. And so that's one area we really, it's the old-fashioned way. Get them a piece of paper, print it out, fill it out, send it back. Even if it's a picture, a camera, we'll take it. So.
Very good. Over to you, Cindy.
Thanks, David. Here's a tough one. When is it better to retain a student rather than reteach? Or is it? Who wants to tackle that one? When should a student be retained versus reteaching a skill? Michael.
I don't have a whole lot of expertise in this area, but I do have a little bit of experience that I can share. I also do some of the ESE services for the school. And one thing that I have noticed is when you have a child who has a learning disability, it's very different than when you have a child that doesn't have a learning disability. And I think sometimes we can be just looking at those scores, and we don't want to just look at the scores alone. We have to really look at the capability of the child. And you also need to look at other information to see where there are gaps in their education. Is it something that you have a really bright student that is the capability, and they've just missed out on something that they can relearn that pretty quickly and move on? Or do you have another student who just wasn't really ready yet for that information and could use another year of those basic foundations? I'm also a firm believer that retention happens best at the youngest years. The further you go in education, the more difficult it is to close those gaps. For example, I've seen a couple of students in the past in 1st grade, kindergarten, that have been retained and have made mountains and mountains of improvements because they were really catching up on those foundational issues that they had missed.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that? When is it time to retain? Renita.
most of our students that we've retained have been when they're new students coming into our school, especially when they've been older students. I totally agree with what Michael said. When they're younger, kindergarten, first grade, it's easy for us to decide, yes, this is going to be a great choice. Maturity, social skills, you know, you take everything into consideration, not just a test or a little bit of analysis, but you got to take everything into perspective for that child. But we've had several students as they're coming into our school as a new student that we've chosen to retain them. And I can say every single one of them that we've made that decision, it's been a positive choice. It's been very good for them. We're typically a good solid year advanced from the students when they're coming in academically. And so if we can see that in the entrance testing when they're coming in, we just talk with the families and let them know. But additionally, if we, not only academically, but when you can tell in your entrance interviews if they're immature and if they're not going to make it in your classrooms. And so that's been really successful for new students. But I don't think we've retained anybody above third grade that haven't been new students coming in. I think that's hard on them socially.
Yes. David, I think we have time for one more question.
Does anyone have any final thoughts? Something that perhaps has come to mind here during the course of our discussion? Anyone have something they want to add? Go ahead, Melissa. We've got just a few minutes left, but please go ahead.
If you are new to assessment, it's going to sound really scary and really daunting when there's a lot of terms that you don't know and you're unfamiliar with. But the best way to get going is to just start. And you have to start somewhere, whether it's surveying your staff or surveying your students, and get in the practice of asking good questions, looking at the data, making some changes based on those. And if you're like, well, I don't even know where to begin asking those questions, get signed in to the ACSI community blogs, because there's tons of resources that are there, surveys, polls, things like that. And if they're not there, it's literally as simple as asking a question, because there's tons of people out there that have that information just sitting there, and they're very willing to post it with you and share. But if you don't know, where to get started, I would suggest getting started there and reaching out to ACSI, because both those places have been a wonderful wealth. And like I said, you got to start. That's the key, is you got to start. Maybe start little, but you got to start.
Thank you. We're all out of time, but I do want to remind you that if your school is located in a school choice state and you're receiving funds in the form of vouchers or tax credits, you may not be exempt from summative testing, even though public schools in your states may be exempt. We have found this to be the case in several states, so please be aware of your state's unique requirements in specific school choice states. As we close out the town hall portion of our meeting, we encourage you to continue conversations on the ACSI community group thread dedicated to this discussion in particular. You can find a link to that discussion on our coronavirus homepage at acsi.org. You'll also find a link there to today's recording. We have been looking for ways to bless our schools during this period, and one way we hope to do that is by offering a free subscription to ACSI Connexus Premium from now until June 15th for our member schools. Premium hosts over 500 teacher development courses on 40 topic-based channels for teachers' individualized learning. You'll find the link to register at acsi.org. I sincerely hope you will join us on Friday, May 15th for Maintaining Healthy Attachments for Children During a Crisis with Dr. Barbara Sorrells, author of the award-winning book, Reaching and Teaching Children Exposed to Trauma. Then next Wednesday, we have a town hall titled Back to School, What's Going to Be Different? Here, Dr. Lynn Swanner will share the data she received from our schools on the COVID-19 survey, and we will have several school leaders sharing how they'll be starting the new year differently. Please check out the coronavirus website for ongoing updates regarding these opportunities. Stay tuned. There will be more relevant topics to come. David?
Thank you so much, Cindy. We'd like to now invite everyone to join a regional chat room. We're also hosting an international and early education chat room. These chat rooms will allow you to have more discussion together with your colleagues and talk with them about how they're handling this important issue. These Zoom meetings are hosted by your ACSI directors, and we are providing the links in the chat panel at this time. Well, thank you again for joining us, and thank you to our PDP team of speakers and all of our excellent panelists today. We hope this time was an encouragement and a blessing to you. Please consider joining our Monday Connection Time with ACSI President Dr. Larry Taylor for a short devotion, ACSI update, and a Q&A time. Let's head to the chat rooms now, and thank you again for joining us.